Welcome everyone to Beyond Basic Targeting, building your nurture targeting strategy and proving real ROI. Thank you everyone for coming. Today you will be hearing from Edward Unthank, founder of Etumos. So without further ado, take it away, Edward.
Thanks. Thank you. So my name's Edward Unthank. As you might have heard before, I describe myself as embarrassingly involved with Marketo. I've been a Marketo champion for quite a few years. I run the Seattle Marketo user group with Jeff Shearer. And today I was hoping to talk about something that I think is a really fun topic, which is getting beyond just normal basic engagement programs and getting into more complex targeting. And then the other thing that I'm really interested in is talking about a specific way to do testing and actually measure the effectiveness of strategies. I'm also going to be rotating back and forth between a live demo of our instance because I think that's pretty interesting to see, but it could go terribly wrong, so just hold with me. So, kind of three pieces of the agenda today. First thing, build better nurture targeting, self-explanatory in the title. The second thing that we're going to be talking about is going to be, I'm going to go through what I call profiling programs in Marketo and how to create them. I'll get more into that, but basically that's the kind of Marketo built machine learning to group people automatically into the right interest and profile in a way that you can actually automatically use in Marketo. And then the last one is to actually prove the return on investment of your targeting itself, which I don't think is really talked about very much in terms of actually saying that targeting brings in money and how much. So throughout all of this, I like to make these super dense. So practically what I'm doing is I'm going to be making a lot of references to assets that we've built before, a lot of like how-to, a lot of screen shares and everything else like that. So you can go to that link right there that the Etumos goat is thinking of. And if you're generous, you can put on that a UTM campaign, kind of charity UTM campaign, which I like to watch those come in real-time analytics. So, fundamentals. There are kind of three things that are kind of driving the decisions around what should be considered good and bad in this case. The first thing is using marketing automation actually to make an automated path. What we want to do is build a machine that is going to increase itself in results over time and just increase those results. Instead of doing one-off campaigns and batch manual process, instead trying to take leads, route them into the best fit, and then come up with hypotheses and having hypotheses of what is going to be more effective at bringing in better results. And then taking those hypotheses and applying them so that you can say from the get-go, there's going to be a success criteria of what we're doing here. This is what it's going to be, and that's going to be the approach to building things out, as opposed to more of a finger in the wind, let's do a targeting of the month or a targeting of the quarter. And then finally, I hound on this all the time, which is making a system robust and scalable. You could say that would be repeatable and not breaking, but that's fancier terms for it. So basically we want to make sure that Marketo can grow over time. If you want to change your mind slightly about how you do something tomorrow, it doesn't mean rebuilding your whole instance. And it can already fit into your existing instance if you have it architected in a way that makes this actually happen. So before I get into that, so I'm not the only one talking here, or maybe I still will be, I'd like to see, by show of hands, there are going to be two options here on how you want to choose your own adventure for where this goes. Who is more interested, by show of hands, in strategy than the actual implementation? By a raise of hands? Cool, that looks like a good portion. And then the inverse of that, who is more interested in implementation than strategy? Okay, so half and half, as always happens. Great. With that note, so moving on to this this slide here, I did 2 years ago. I talked about intelligent lead nurture. It was more about building one individual nurture track and how to do that well, moving people between streams, 3 streams. And then the overall philosophy of how to do this is this Venn diagram, or whatever that would be, a hepta diagram. So 2 things. What we want the leads to do, which is to go down the funnel and turn into money for us. And then we also have what the leads actually want to do, which is from a content marketing perspective to learn through a process and try to educate down the funnel. So that means kind of the sweet spot is to hit the point where each communication both teaches the lead as well as accelerates them down the funnel toward what we're trying to get them to be, which is customers eventually. So, excuse me, there's the first way that I think would really ground all of these conversations is focusing on what's really going to matter here. So what you have here on the left is generally serious decisions waterfall with generally normal benchmarks conversion rates from stage to stage. Before we're talking about, instead of just saying targeting for the sake of targeting, we have targeting with a goal. The goal is to increase the conversion rate from one stage to the next. Because the serious decisions waterfall, this waterfall method, is actually a mathematical model. So that means if you increase the conversion rate from one stage to the next, all else equal, you will create more revenue. So the entire point of this is to look at what is the, for example, serious decisions benchmarks of conversion rates, what's the industry standard, and then where are you specifically. If you look at, for example, on the right, if your conversion rate between MAL and MQL is 3%, then you can notice that this is an area of improvement, and that's really the kind of course for normal acquisition and nurture. So here, it's really important before we start talking about nurture and nurture strategy that we start with a hypothesis, which is our goal is to increase the conversion rate from MAL to MQL. The way that we're going to do that is that we have a hypothesis. We say, if we send targeted nurture, targeted communications to someone that is more interesting to them, that they will engage more content and be more interested in what we're providing to them, then they will learn more, they will identify more with our brand, and they will be more likely to convert into a marketing qualified lead down the line. It's really important because this becomes the entire hypothesis of what nurture is. And without that, you're just kind of swinging blindly in the wind. So that's kind of what our goal and eyes on the prize looks like, is we're trying to make sure that we're converting at a higher rate and saying we're doing targeting, and the sake of that is to increase that conversion. So nurture targeting strategies, going back to robust and scalable, what we want to do is make sure that something is actually scalable. These are some kind of nurture targeting strategies that we see a lot used in a lot of the implementations that we do. We have buyer persona, or just straight up persona, not necessarily only buyers. We have use case profiling, which is to say, if you have one specific product, you have a training platform, online training platform. There are a lot of different use cases. Some of the use cases might be training your sales team. Another one might be use in education in schools and other things like that. That ends up being specific use cases. That is one specific type of targeting. Another one ends up being product interest. This works really well if you have multiple products as a B2B company, and not an enormous amount of them, not B2C, but more of like 1 to 5 large actual products. And then the last one is what I call pain point profiling, and this is kind of the flip side of the product interest. So product interest is basically how you conceive of your products, because that's the nouns that you think of. You think of, we have product A and product B, but a prospect, for the most part, when you're talking about a content marketing approach, they're obsessed with their own problem, and they really don't think in terms of your solution or in terms of your actual products before they're deeply familiar. So the point that you're marketing, they're more concerned about what their individual pain points are and how that you could possibly solve them. So these are 4 specific nurture targeting strategies that we see, and actually end up being really scalable because you can write content to them, you can do an actual diagram out to say buyer stage on one slice and then your buyer personas on another one, and then build out all the content flow within that. Not scalable is also important to talk about, and these are things like campaigns. Campaign focus, quarterly focus, kind of themes throughout a campaign. This is something that is great for a quarter, a half a year, but doesn't actually scale out ad infinitum. Because really, ideally, what we're trying to do, going back, we were trying to make basically an engine that is going to route people automatically into the area where they will be most likely to convert into customers later on down the line. And we're trying to make sure that everyone, starting from 100%, routes down into the area that they're most likely to do this. Timely events is also not scalable at all. I think there is a place for it once all of your scalable infrastructure is in place, but it is not really quite a starting place that we generally focus on. And then finally, executive swim is definitely not a scalable route. So some things that I think would be interested in talk about in terms of choosing which of these nurture strategies. So you have buyer personas. Everyone's probably familiar with buyer personas. Use case, and then product interest and pain point. Saying which of these makes the most sense for my company is, the answer is it really kind of depends on how you internally think of your products, of your company, of your targeting. Because, for example, in our case, our product interest for our prospects works pretty well because we have a few different slices and that's how we think of the world. Buyer personas doesn't as much fit with how we see our marketing. The main way that we're going to be doing this is what I call profiling programs, which I will get into right here. So getting into, there are kind of 3 major elements to automated nurture that are the foundational building blocks into what I'm building in here. So first, a generic discovery track. Because remember a few slides ago, we saw conversion rate from MAL to MQL. That needs to be your standard. That needs to be all else equal. That is your control group with no specific targeting. You will get this conversion rate from marketing accepted lead to marketing qualified lead. So generic discovery track basically puts in all the content as well as links where people can self-select into reading content, clicking on links, visiting web pages, so that they can identify their interest to you by visiting web pages, as well as an amalgamation of other individual triggers that can be measured and used in Marketo. Second piece is a profiling program. Get into a lot more detail on this in a second, but basically this is an operational program in Marketo, or at least to start, which calculates up categorical scores for each product interest or each pain point into separate scoring fields, and then calculates the sum total of this is the best fit based on if you have a score of 5 here and 10 here and 100 here, 100 is going to be the best fit for you, so that's going to be the summed up profile that we're going to be targeting for. And then the last one here is a TrafficDirector. Is everyone familiar? Who's familiar with Traffic Cop? Great. So this is similar to that. It's basically steering Eric Colbone's idea and then upgrading it a little bit, at least in title. Whereas Traffic Cop before was to say which individual email should be sent, and it was an operational program to calculate and stamp and send that one specific email. Traffic Cop instead is to say calculating which engagement program someone should be added into. So not in the nitty-gritty details, but kind of an upgrade into that's the best course forward for you to be involved in. How this fits together is kind of like this. So imagine you have here, on top you have the discovery track. A lead is created. You have no information on them. You put them into a discovery track. Everyone is in there. All prospects based on marketing accepted leads gets put into a discovery track. In there, we have a lot of different topics of interest. We have if you're interested in product A or B or C, or if you're a persona A, B, or C, and then kind of crafting the content so that people can selectively engage with one of those topics, get scored up, and then we can gather enough information about them to actually move them into a different engagement program. So kind of a key which I can walk through here. So discovery track right there on top, that is an engagement program. Awareness, research, and consideration. I actually talked about this 2 years ago, and this is buyer stages. You can go to the link that we had provided, and it's going to be peppered throughout here as well. And that has a link back to how to build that and what that means. It's kind of too granular specifically for this. But that is to say those are 3 separate streams: awareness, research, and consideration, and those exist within each engagement program. Down there below, you see product interest 1/pain point. That is to say, you can imagine those being separate engagement programs also. So that's the more targeted results after we know what profile is going to be the best fit for someone. And then the actual arrows here is kind of the traffic director moving people from the discovery track once we have enough information, putting them into the better fit, better profiled engagement program itself. So, profiling programs. Probably going to be a small amount here. Has anyone, who has heard of profiling programs as I'm referring to them here? Okay, cool, just a few. So, this is how this works. So profiling program is kind of something that we've come up with a bit. And philosophically how it works is you imagine you have 3 scoring fields, category A, B, and C in this case. Everyone starts off, lead is created, you get started off with 0 points. We categorize every single link on the site, every single email, every single piece of content, everything else that you can possibly imagine measuring and fitting into different categories, and then create X amount of fields. So in this case, in our case, we'd say product interest. We have product interest A, product interest B, and product interest C, 3 scores. And over time, as people engage with the site, behavior score generally goes up as they click on more things and visit more pages. But also what we're doing is we're scoring not just linearly, you're adding points to your overall score, but you're engaging more in content, reading more pages on the site that are relevant to product 1 than product 2. And those all end up being summing up here. So you can imagine these 3 bars, A, B, and C are score fields. And then the actual arbitrary threshold is when we say, this is going to be how we're going to calculate which category someone actually fits into. And in this case, this ends up summing into a Marketo segmentation. 3 segments, in this case, 3 segments. And basically, if you can imagine the math on this is to say, category 1, category A here has 150 points. Category B has 70 points. Category C has 110. How this works is the segmentation, you have to come up with rules, and it basically would say stack ranked. If you have 100 points or greater in this category, then you will be in segmentation C. If you have more than 100 in section B, then that's B, and if you have more in section A, then that's A. At a certain point, and this is more nuance, you have to choose if an all else equal, which one wins. We generally stack that based on what's our desirability to sell. So for example, in the case of product interest, we stack rank that by what's the most profitable for us, and then that becomes all else equal. We're going to put you into the talking about the products that is the most profitable for us. So this is kind of abstract here, and how it actually works, I'm going to open this up in a second, is having one kind of monster program and then an exercise to go through that monster program, operational program, bunch of triggers, adding up individual scores. It's like, imagine it's behavior score times number of categories. And then this ends up summing into one specific field that turns into a segmentation. So I will tab over to live demo here and see how this goes. All right, so product interest profiling. So Etumos, we're a consulting company. So this is our own demo instance. We use it to kind of build out products for the most part, or programs that we turn into products. So here we have product 1, 2, and 3 correlates to category A, B, and C here. These are basically 3 different score fields that we use. And everyone, when a lead is created, starts off at 0 in all of those. And then within that, we go into, for example, our Marketo implementation area. We have a trigger, which is visits web page contains any of these URL strings. Contains any of these URL strings, and then we end up scoring up this individual product interest. So we have this score name, product interest score 1, and then we score them up by a medium value. The point of this is to say that you're looking for multiple scores over time. So you imagine every visit ends up adding 5 to 10 points. You're not looking for a one hit, you show interest in one specific page and then you're an instant win. We're trying to say aggregate over time, you're showing trends relative to each other in terms of score. We're not looking for, there's not actually a magical number, it's just looking at relative score and calculating that out as best you can based on the scores that are there. So the process that we go through here, I'm going to show back to this guy. So we have kind of 4 different value tiers that we use here. We say instant win, which is to say if you have something, and this is kind of very rarely used, but if you have something that is absolutely 100%, if you fill out a form on the please let me talk about product number 1, that would be an instant win example. But for the most part, we have instant, high value, medium value, and low value, or in terms of actual metal scoring, platinum, gold, bronze, and silver. So these are the 4 kind of values. To get more granular than that in terms of score doesn't really add that much because we're looking at aggregate numbers over time, not individual one-off scores. What you can do in Marketo is you can actually come up with a tagging framework based on unique values. So the best example of this is if you're added to list. So this is kind of what we do. So our entire framework is focused around, you're adding into, there are consistent ways that things are done, program templates are used. If you download an asset, you're added to a canonical download list. Regardless of what source you came in, online advertising, direct, organic search, you get added to that canonical download list. So what we do is we set up that specific canonical download list. For example, in this guy right here, this is like a hand-raised form practically. And if someone fills out the form on this landing page, which is, you're interested in this product kind of thing, then you get added to this list after your auto response. And then you get added to a list saying DL for download, and then we have our specific product tag right there. So we have just this name right here, WP3, is meant to be obscure because it won't naturally occur in any of the normal language names that you use. That's kind of the point there. But here you can see if something contains YP1, which is just basically you can treat that as a unique string. If someone gets added to a list that contains YP1, then we're going to increment their score for product interest number 1, product number 1 by a medium value. So in order to actually implement that, we have this kind of attempt at a robust setup so that you have an operational program going in the background, setting up kind of a tagging framework, and it can run in the background without long-term maintenance. We just set up a bunch of hooks, and then if we ever want to make a new asset, we ever add another asset that we think is indicative of product interest number 1, we would go to WP3 here and say YP1. And now the next time that someone downloads that asset, fills out that form, they'll get added to this list, which now contains the tag for YP1, and it'll increase their actual score for being interested in product interest product number 1 for us. All that to say that this is an entire kind of framework where you can score all of your assets into these types of targeting that make the most sense to you. The more straightforward starting place that we usually go with, so to say you were to embark on this adventure, you want to go down into product interest profiling your entire site and your entire company. What we do is we start with first off, we crawl the site with something like Screaming Frog. You can actually put it onto your site. It'll give you every single URL. And then you take that entire URL, put it into a spreadsheet, and then categorize. So you have all the URLs on one side. And then another column, you have product interest 1, product interest 2, product interest 3, and then categorize those URLs. Because the largest volume of these actual trigger ends up being in visiting web pages over time. That's where the most volume of any activity and any score comes from. So in this case, we have, you can imagine we can take our entire site, etumos.com, and then we can break it into all of these different URLs. And then after we've categorized through the spreadsheet, we can copy and paste into here. And then this becomes our comprehensive list of, if you visit any of our web pages, we'll score you up for product 1 or product 2 or product 3. Is this making sense so far? A lot of nods, all right. So this is into the real nitty-gritty here, but basically what this ends up going into, you can also imagine this as just behavior scores for each type that you're interested in. Each field has its own, and then it's just behavior score adding up for each of those. This sums into, importantly, an actual segmentation here. Excuse me. So using a segmentation in Marketo, this is kind of like the major driver and source of truth for where the targeting goes. When you're talking about TrafficDirector, it's not watching at individual score changes. You're summing that up into one segmentation. This segmentation ends up being the driver. So the kind of point is to make the scoring as its own module that you can edit sometimes and not have to edit all the time. And it sums into an actual segmentation where your threshold rules are. So really, here's what our threshold rules are in this case. This is the most simplistic version. Let's see if this works. Guess not. Okay. Okay, so these are our rules. So cascading logic, you can only fit into one piece of the pie. You cannot be in multiple pieces. If your product interest for score number 2, which in our case would be the more profitable individual product interest, therefore all else equal, we want to put you in number 2. If your score is 100 or greater, then you're going to be in the segment for interest in product number 2. If that's not true, because this is all cascading logic, then we say your score for number 2 is not 100 or greater, so we go on to the next rule, which is consulting. That's our second product. In that case, we want to say, is your score 100 or greater? If it is, then you're in that segment. If that's not true, we go to the last one, which is kind of like individual other products. And if that's 100 or greater, then you fit into there. What it ends up summing into is this slice of the entire database into these different pie pieces. So this is important because your actual traffic director, if you're doing any kind of routing after this, it would be watching for these rules and watching for someone to change. Sound good so far? So that's kind of the deep in the weeds. As I said before, we have on the link that's right there, we have all this kind of outlined and documented in terms of like real technical depth. It's basically just a bunch of instructions of trying to give things away. So in terms of targeting, the idea is to have general discovery track, and then based on when segment changes into a certain type of interest, if you get into a different product interest based on that segment, people will move, ideally you move from that discovery track into a more targeted engagement program. This on screen was from a while ago. I went into the nitty-gritty of actually within one specific engagement program and, for example, why we use programs as casts as opposed to individual emails, and also what the logic of skipping around is right there. Excuse me. TrafficDirector. This is the third final moving piece here. So TrafficDirector, what this does is moves people and puts them into engagement programs and then moves them around. This is also pretty in-depth technical, and in order to streamline time, on that link that I had right there, we have a document that we're going to be outlining to talk about exactly how it works and kind of screenshotting on the screen here every single smart campaign and flow step so that you can just build it yourself based on literally copying and pasting and recreating there. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, the kind of third final piece here, is bringing back into the hypothesis and having a hypothesis-based test. So this is kind of my own opinion here, is that I think in B2B marketing, we're doing testing really poorly. I think we're not really focused on results that matter. We're paying attention to subject lines that are not going to have incremental real value, when instead we should be thinking about and testing, are these general nurture initiatives, is this general marketing initiative actually bringing in incremental revenue? And this is something that you see, like a new CMO comes in, throws everything overboard, tries everything new strategy of targeting. It's never tested, and it ends up being just like a kind of fancy, we hope this works, and if it doesn't work based on revenue, in a few months that CMO is gone and somebody else is new. So I think a better version of that is to have actual and move toward controlled tests. Right now in testing, a lot of what we're doing is we're testing campaigns, we're testing emails against each other, but that's not as important as the all-up strategy that we're actually implementing. So the idea here is to create controlled tests based on people in the funnel. So imagine you have, this is deep into the technical weeds here again, but basically imagine leads come in the door and you want to number them 1 through 10. Not just based on what campaign you're testing, but what actual group they are. So we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then just keep on going on as leads are created. And in order to create an actual testing of that strategy, to prove that your strategy brings in more money and actual higher conversion rates, you can actually use that to design controlled tests where we say, number 1 is not going to get this new targeting initiative. And then we want to prove that our targeting initiative actually brings in more incremental revenue. We have a holdout group that we're measuring the difference in. And that kind of thing can be applied not just to individual targeting strategy, but also to large pop trends in marketing, like ABM. You have an idea on ABM? Instead of just going wildly into pursuing it, you can do a controlled test and say, does ABM actually bring incremental, our ABM efforts actually bring incremental revenue effort and conversion rates from MAL to MQL, or MQL to SAL in the case of ABM. So basically what you can do, here's a program that you can recreate yourself. Basically it's a scheduled campaign running on new leads as they're created, and then you have this individual flow step, one flow step, change data value. We use one field for a random sample field, and then you say, it's basically to number off 1 through 10 on new leads as they're created. This is stamped and it stays with them forever over their lifetime, as opposed to a campaign where you're testing, does subject line A perform better than subject line B? It's meant to take this and turn into a tool that you can use for controlled tests. And as I'm running out of time here, the most important things that I generally find from this is, first, scalable revenue. The whole point is, if you have a discovery track, you're working on increasing the conversion rate compared to your discovery track. If you just send the same thought leadership messaging without any interest in where people are, then you can increase the conversion rate and increase revenue over time. So that basically you can say, we're going to increase the conversion rate from 7, and then more tests, you can get it up to 8 if it doesn't work, then you can kill off anything that's performing poorly. Building a machine you can improve without rework, really important, robust, and scalable. And then you should actually test strategic targeting, which I don't really think that anyone is doing as far as I've seen in terms of B2B marketing. And you can do that through controlled tests, random cohorts, and actually planning up ahead and saying, like, there's a hypothesis that's going to increase conversion rates here, and targeting it that way as opposed to just throwing targeting at a wall and seeing what sticks. And that is also a UTM tag here if you guys want to use that now. So we have 5 minutes and 14 seconds left for questions, which is just in time. I think the process is usually to go up to the microphones, but if that's taken a while, you can shout it out and I can repeat it.
Hi. I have a question. Right here.
Oh no, I'm coming to you guys.
Edward?
Oh, hey.
Right here.
Yes, thanks.
I noticed that, this is kind of a silly question, but I noticed that you have different UTM tracking links for each of the links that you've used
Yes.
to this. Are you going to use that in the type of profiling that you've talked about?
Yeah, so there are actually another one that we didn't that I didn't show here. So we do query strings. Query strings are one of the things that we look for. We don't look for specifically UTM strings, but we do look for specific, based on our framework, if query string contains any of these. And then you can say any link, it doesn't matter, you know, if you're doing it on social, you can have your social people tagging things as different product interest. So if somebody visits a web page with this unique string, then it should increment the score and just fit into the framework where you don't have to change the operational program. You can just fit the framework to make it work.
Cool, thanks.
All right, next question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, with the complexity of the segmenting, so as you're segmenting for pain points and maybe persona as an example, and then you overlay the cohorts, how does that actually, and maybe I'm getting too detailed, but how do you actually functionally execute the testing when you have so many different segmentations that you're running simultaneously?
Mm-hmm. So it starts off with a baseline, start with a hypothesis, design a test, and then know what the success metric or fail metric is, and then doing that one at a time. You know, if you have a one-person team, then you can only bite off as much as you can chew and test one thing at a time. If you have many different people on a team, then you can add more complexity by people monitoring. The test does take manual effort because, you know, this is, you figure out the results in spreadsheets. You don't figure it out precisely in Marketo. It's kind of export and then look at the results.
Since you're maintaining these segmentations for products, are you never worried about cannibalizing yourself if someone's interested in multiple products? I know you have the hierarchy where, you know, you give priority to the ones you make the most money off of, but if they are truly interested in 2 products, is that not something you're concerned about?
It's not necessarily, it depends on what your actual company is. So this is kind of the difference between, like, if you should do product interest profiling or any of the other kinds. It really depends on what your business is.
Okay.
So for example, us, we're not worried about it because it's kind of all goes into the same stream, and we have a very clear distinction of a hierarchy from one to the next. The question would be then, if you equally want to sell product 1 and 3, then maybe you would focus more on pain points or use case profiling, because really you can swap out products into use case or anything else. The entire core infrastructure is the same, you just change the name of the field. So I think in your case, it probably wouldn't use that. I'd figure out something else that jives more with how your actual marketing is going.
I have one more question. Are you dropping these people into separate streams in one nurture or into separate nurtures totally?
Good question. So it ends up going into different engagement programs. Let me get back to here. So the TrafficDirector, once you have the segment changes to X, I would move them to a different engagement program. And then where you put them in that is based on what buyer stage they're in. So if someone was in discovery research, then then we figure out they're interested or they have pain point 2, we would put them into engagement program pain point 2 in the research stream.
So in what you just mentioned, so in other words, what you're saying is that each of those engagement programs would have, they're categorized into those different streams from the discovery track.
That's correct. I'll show you what it looks like. That'll make more sense in that diagram. So here we have, this is our discovery track here. This is actually what our discovery track looks like. And this is what all of our engagement programs look like. There are these 3 streams based on awareness, research, and consideration. You can look back at the link. I talked about this 2 years ago at it was called Intelligent Lead Nurture, and kind of talked about how to transition between those streams and everything else. But basically, if you have a different program, a different targeting for this engagement, you would go to the actual nurture program template, and then you would clone it, and then it would basically, you'd replace the content, but the transition rules would end up being the same. So for example, here's the actual transition rules within this stream, so that you transition from one stream to the next. So every individual engagement program is the same architecture of this, just kind of multiplied out.
Thank you.
And it looks like we're just about out of time. If anybody else has any other questions, Edward is available up front. And thank you, everyone. Happy hour is about to start.